It began on a night when no animal dared make a sound. The crickets stilled, the dogs hid beneath the porch, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. In Wilton County, Georgia, 1842, the people spoke of a melody that rose from the LaGrange Plantation barn, a hymn no one recognized. It was sung in a trembling voice, rising and collapsing like someone gasping between sobs. By dawn, the barn door was ajar, and inside lay only broken candle stubs, a Bible torn down the spine, and the faint smell of sweet decay. The mistress, Eudora LaGrange, told the townsfolk her daughter, Clara, had taken ill and been laid to rest quietly. Yet no burial took place, no grave was marked, and the enslaved workers whispered that the girl had not died. She had changed. When the sheriff demanded proof, Eudora smiled faintly and said, "The Lord calls some back in ways we cannot understand." For years afterward, neighbors avoided the property at night, because when the moon hung low and full, the singing returned, soft, slow, and eerily familiar. The LaGrange family carried a name that clung to Georgia's soil like rot. They arrived before the Revolution, wealthy and devout, building their fortune from cotton and bodies. But the true family power wasn't their fields, it was their rituals. Beneath the main house stood a small chapel Eudora's late husband had constructed. It bore no cross, only a single iron ring embedded in the floor. Locals said it was for chaining the possessed, but servants whispered it was used to anchor souls. Eudora believed deeply in purity of blood, behavior, and devotion. Her daughter Clara failed all three. Overweight, withdrawn, and often caught singing to herself, she was considered by her mother a living embarrassment. Eudora forced her to fast, sometimes for days, locking her in the chapel to sweat out sin. Clara, however, prayed not for forgiveness but escape. Her diary, later found in a trunk, spoke of nightly dreams. Voices in the trees, a woman in a black dress whispering, "The earth remembers what is taken." When Eudora discovered Clara had begun visiting the slave quarters, she was furious. What she didn't know was that Clara's visits were not acts of rebellion, they were preparations. Their names were Jonas, Reed, and Solomon, three men brought from distant plantations, each with a reputation for the strange. Jonas could read omens in firelight. Reed saw futures in his dreams, and Solomon was said to have never closed his eyes, claiming sleep is the devil's invitation. Clara was drawn to them, fascinated by their quiet power, their songs in the night that carried both grief and strength. She brought them food, listened to their hymns, and asked questions that made them uneasy. When asked what she sought, Clara said softly, "Freedom, not from chains, from the skin that holds me." The men spoke among themselves that she carried sorrow too deep for her years. One night, Solomon told her, "Freedom costs what you love most." Clara replied, "Then let it take me whole." Witnesses later recalled seeing her leave the main house barefoot, her nightgown dragging through the mud, carrying 3 white candles and a piece of her own hair. She met them near the orchard, under the moon's sick light, and they began to sing. Not a hymn, but something older, slower, like a calling. What happened that night was whispered in fragments. Some said Clara made a pact of rebirth. Others believed she had been used in a ceremony forbidden even among the enslaved. What's known is this: she asked to be made whole in spirit. The 3 men told her that to be reborn, she must surrender her body completely to the earth. They marked the ground in a circle and chanted words the wind refused to carry. By morning, Clara returned to her room. Her mother found her trembling, her skin fevered, her hands clutching dirt. Eudora demanded to know where she had been. Clara only smiled and said, "In the orchard I met Mercy." That night, blood appeared on the walls of her room, long streaks drawn by unseen hands. Eudora accused the servants of witchcraft, but when she confronted them, they fell silent, terrified. She locked Clara in the chapel again, but at dawn the door stood open. Inside, written on the wall in charcoal, were the words, "I am the seed and the soil." On the 8th night after the orchard, the house servants saw Clara walking toward the barn. Her steps were slow, her eyes unfocused, as if she followed a sound no one else could hear. In her hands, she carried a small Bible, 3 candles, and a length of red cloth. Jonas, Reed, and Solomon followed her from a distance. They entered the barn. None of them came out alive. Neighbors later described a smell drifting across the fields, sweet, metallic, and strangely inviting. When Eudora finally forced the door open, she found melted wax, ashes, and the imprint of bodies in the straw. Circular, intertwined. At the center lay a shallow pit, the dirt disturbed as if something had tried to claw its way out. No blood, no corpses. Just the faint echo of a hum that stopped the moment she stepped inside. That night, lightning struck the barn roof, setting it ablaze. Eudora stood in the rain, screaming her daughter's name until her voice broke. When the fire was out, nothing remained but black soil that steamed long after the rain had passed. Sheriff Hollis arrived 2 days later. He found the ground still warm beneath the ashes. When he lifted a plank, a stench poured out so heavy it made his horse rear back. Beneath the floorboards were small bundles wrapped in linen, teeth, fingernails, and strands of hair tied with twine. Eudora refused to answer his questions. "My daughter's at peace," she said. "The earth has claimed her, as promised." The sheriff ordered the barn destroyed, but each time men tried to level the foundation, their tools cracked. By the third attempt, one worker went missing, his footprints leading straight into the field and stopping halfway. The sheriff left, shaken. That night, his deputy claimed he heard a woman singing behind his house. The song was soft, broken, and full of longing. When he opened the door, there was nothing but the smell of peaches and iron. Weeks passed before Eudora began to hear her daughter's voice again. It came at dusk, faint at first, a whisper from the garden, a laugh behind the curtains. Then one evening she looked out toward the barn's ruins and saw Clara standing there, pale as milk, her body swollen, her eyes black. The figure raised its hand, beckoning. Eudora ran outside, crying her name, but the closer she came, the colder the air grew. The shape melted into the dark. When she returned indoors, muddy footprints led from the door to her bed. The next morning, her sheets were damp, as though she had slept underwater. Eudora began fasting, praying for deliverance. But no prayer silenced the singing that now came nightly from beneath the earth. The servants fled. By winter she was alone, and the fields around the plantation began to die, their roots turning black as tar. Reverend Klein came from Savannah after hearing rumors of possession. He found Eudora frail, skeletal, her eyes sunken yet fever-bright. "She walks," Eudora whispered, "but she's not mine anymore." The Reverend offered to bless the property. The moment he began to pray, every candle in the room went out. He ventured to the ruins of the barn, clutching his Bible. The dirt vibrated under his boots. He knelt to pray, and then his voice faltered. Something beneath the soil exhaled, slow and heavy, shaking the ground. He fled, stumbling back to the house, his hands streaked black. "There's something breathing down there," he said. He left before dawn and was later found wandering the road, muttering, "The mother eats her own." His horse was discovered dead a mile away, eyes wide, tongue blackened. Months later, the plantation fell silent. Traveler passing through saw the doors wide open and smoke curling from the chimney, though no one lived there. Inside, every mirror was covered in cloth. In the parlor sat a single dinner plate, half filled with soil. Upstairs, the walls were covered in symbols written in charcoal, circles within circles, intersecting like ripples on dark water. On the floor lay 3 small clay dolls bound with thread. One contained a tooth, another a curl of hair, the third was empty. The traveler fled and returned with the sheriff, but by then Eudora was gone. Only a faint trail of footprints led from her bedroom to the barn's ruins. In the dirt where the circle had once been burned, they found her bonnet perfectly clean. 70 years later, in 1912, the land was sold to a lumber company. During excavation, workers unearthed a rusted tin box beneath the soil. Inside was a water-damaged journal written in Eudora's hand. "She is not gone," one passage read. "She is beneath me, whispering. I feel her move in my dreams." Another entry described a ritual called the exchange of flesh, performed to bind grief to the ground. She wrote of hearing Clara hum at night, a lullaby from infancy, and of soil rising on its own around her bed. The final entry ended mid-sentence. "I am called. The barn is open again. She waits." In 1913, the LaGrange land was purchased by a northern lumber merchant named Charles Calloway. The plantation house had been reduced to ruins, but Calloway saw opportunity in its broad acres and cheap timber. He brought his wife, Margaret, and their 9-year-old daughter Evelyn to start a new life in the reclaimed South. They knew nothing of what had happened there. The first months were quiet, but in late summer, Evelyn began waking in the night. She said the ground beneath her bed was singing. At first, her parents dismissed it as nightmares. Then one morning they found her outside barefoot, her nightdress black with dirt humming softly. When asked where she'd been, she said, "The lady wanted to show me her garden." Margaret tried to pray with her, but Evelyn refused to kneel, insisting the lady below doesn't like that name. Over the next weeks, doors opened on their own, and faint humming drifted through the floorboards. One night, Charles went into the basement after hearing tapping. He found the dirt floor disturbed, dug up by small hands. Buried in the soil was a child's toy horse carved from peach wood. The date etched on its side, 1842. The next morning, Evelyn's pillow was covered in tiny black seeds. The Calloways thought they'd found a sinkhole when the back field collapsed after a heavy rain. But when Charles climbed down, he saw wooden beams, a structure half buried. It was the remains of the old barn. The air inside was stale and wet, thick with a sweetness that turned his stomach. He struck a match. The flame flickered weakly against a circular chamber lined with rotted boards, and in the center, half consumed by dirt, was something that looked human. Not quite skeleton, not quite preserved. The body was twisted, its limbs curled inward as if it had died praying. Charles called the sheriff. The remains were exhumed and sent to the county coroner, who described them as belonging to a large female, fused with the earth as if partially petrified. He noted the soil around the bones was unnaturally warm. That same night, the coroner's house burned down. The skeleton was never recovered. When the Calloways returned home, they found Evelyn sitting in the orchard, staring at the ground. "She's awake now," she said. "She wants to be seen again." Fear spread through Wilton County when animals began dying near the Calloway property. No wounds, no blood, just lifeless as though their hearts had stopped mid-beat. Charles, determined to erase the horror, ordered all traces of the old barn demolished and the pit filled. But the laborers refused, claiming their tools bent and broke when striking the earth. At last, Charles did it himself. He shoveled dirt until his hands bled. When he finished, he placed a wooden cross over the filled hole. By dawn, the cross was gone. In its place were stones arranged in a perfect circle. Inside it, the soil pulsed faintly, like breathing. Margaret begged her husband to leave. That night, he awoke choking, his mouth filled with dirt. He staggered outside and vomited a small clump of soil that moved, writhing like something alive. When the sheriff arrived the next morning, Charles was gone. Only his boots remained by the barn ruins, toes pointed toward the ground, as though he'd stepped straight into it. Evelyn's diary, later recovered, contained a single line written in a child's careful hand. "Papa is under the garden now. She's teaching him to grow." The county declared the Calloway land abandoned. For years, no one spoke of it. But local children dared each other to visit after sunset. They called it the Singing Field. They said if you stood there long enough, you'd hear humming from underground, low, like something breathing through the soil. One boy, Thomas Rudd, pressed his ear to the earth on a dare. He screamed and fainted. When he woke, he was pale as chalk. He said he heard a woman whispering, "You'll feed her too someday." Rumors spread that the land cursed any who touched it. Families who cut trees nearby found black sap oozing from the wood. A farmer claimed his cows stopped giving milk after grazing near the fence line. By the 1930s, the county fenced off the area and called it a toxic site. But no one could explain the faint singing heard by travelers passing at night, a mournful tune that seemed to follow them home. In 1947, Margaret Voss, a folklore historian from Charleston, arrived to research the LaGrange curse for her book, Cults of the Southern Dead. She interviewed elderly locals who still remembered the Calloways. Many refused to talk, crossing themselves when she mentioned the name Eudora. At the site, she found fragments of scorched beams arranged in a spiral. She noted the soil was warm to the touch despite the cool October air. Her notes, later discovered in her hotel room, described a constant vibration, like something beneath my feet is breathing. She recorded herself reading the last known prayer from Eudora's journal, curious if it held any connection to African spiritual traditions. The next morning, her room was empty. Her tape recorder lay on the bed, still running. The last minute of audio captured a woman humming, then whispering. The mother remembers who feeds her. The recording of Margaret Voss sat in a university archive for decades, labeled Unverified Field Notes. In 1982, sound engineers attempted to restore it. When played at normal speed, it was static and faint humming. When slowed down, 3 distinct female voices emerged, layered, echoing, repeating the phrase, "Bathe in the mother." Analysts concluded the voices were identical in pitch and tone, likely from one source. Yet the recording equipment Voss used could not produce layered audio. A technician who listened alone in the booth described feeling pressure behind his eyes and a taste of copper in his mouth. He refused to finish the project. The tape was sealed again, but copies circulated quietly among students, birthing a new generation of urban legends that if you played the tape after midnight, you'd hear a woman humming from inside your own walls. In 1995, 3 university students, Jenna, Marcus, and Lee, drove from Atlanta to film a short documentary called The LaGrange Covenant. They camped on the old property, unaware their tent rested over the buried barn circle. The recovered footage, now known only through fragments, shows them laughing, interviewing locals and performing mock rituals. Around 3:00 a.m., the camera begins to shake. A low humming fills the air. Jenna asks, "Do you hear that?" Lee replies, "It's coming from the ground." Then Marcus's voice, "She's under us." The camera cuts. When authorities found the site a week later, the equipment was still running. The tent was empty. 3 sets of footprints led into the field. None led out. The final 5 seconds of footage show the lens pointed down, dirt shifting slightly, and a faint woman's voice. "Do you want to be loved forever?" In 2008, a Baptist congregation built a church near the site, believing prayer could cleanse its history. The pastor, Reverend Haynes, declared the ground redeemed by the blood of Christ. Yet parishioners began reporting strange sensations during evening service, tremors under their feet, whispers from beneath the floorboards. Some claimed the hymn books flipped open on their own. The janitor once stayed late to investigate. His tools were found the next morning fused to the concrete, warped by heat. A construction worker later revealed that while pouring the church foundation, they uncovered a cavity filled with blackened soil and fragments of bone. The foreman ordered it sealed immediately. Since then, every Good Friday, the church air turns sweet and heavy, the smell of peaches and rust, and the congregation claims to hear faint music rising from below. In 2021, renovations at the Wilton County Courthouse unearthed a sealed wooden box labeled E.L. Confessionals. Inside were Eudora LaGrange's unsigned letters, written in ink that had rusted to brown. They spoke of an ancient rite borrowed from the broken spirits we owned, performed to ensure control, not salvation. "I took her joy," one letter reads, "and the land took her body in exchange." The papers described a ritual of merging, not between man and woman, but between flesh and soil. The participants believed the earth could absorb corruption if the body offered itself completely. The circle in the barn, the singing, the transformation, all were acts of atonement through consumption. The letters ended with one chilling line, "I hear her still. The Lord is silent, but the ground prays." In 2023, journalist Noah Bradley visited Wilton County for a podcast series on forgotten horrors of the South. He recorded at the old church built on the LaGrange land. The tape captured faint humming beneath his narration, a female voice singing an unfamiliar lullaby. Halfway through, he whispered, "The floor is moving." When rescuers entered 2 days later, they found his equipment intact, but no sign of him. His microphone had recorded for 6 hours after his disappearance. The final minute is silence, followed by slow, rhythmic breathing, and then a whisper that chills every listener who dares to hear it. "I am the seed and the hunger both." Experts confirmed the voice carried over 3 tones simultaneously, one young, one old, and one that didn't register as human. The church has since been abandoned. The earth beneath it continues to swell every October, releasing the scent of peaches and blood. Locals say the singing returns on windless nights, faint but certain. And if you listen closely, you can still hear her. The daughter who begged to be reborn, the mother who couldn't let go, and the soil that learned to eat.